You know, it's so cool seeing hundreds of thousands of people go to the draft. Everybody celebrating last week with the schedule release. JJ, you've talked about how you've transitioned into being a professional and you're less of a Steelers fan now. When's the last time something got you amped about the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I mean, probably like 2015-ish time frame. It's been a while. It's been a while since I really got excited about something Steelers related. What about you with the Jets?
Oh, God. I've been dead inside for a decade.
I'm JJ, and I've been playing in best ball leagues for years. But there are people out there who play a lot more than I do, and there are people out there who have won a lot more than I have. And I want to learn from them. This season, I'll be documenting my journey of max entering Underdog's Best Ball Mania contest. And I'll be doing so with guidance from some of the most successful best ball players on the planet. This is the year where things start to change. This is the year where I officially become a best ball bro.
Welcome into episode number 2 of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson. As always, joined, as if we've done this a million times.
In perpetuity.
As always, joined by my co-host, Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Nothing much, man. I didn't get a chance. I meant to wear my Knicks hoodie last week to show some love to the New York Knickerbockers, but I'm such a true fan that even though they went out in such devastating fashion, like all New York teams do, at least the ones that I root for, had to rock the orange and blue here on the show.
Yeah, what is this? You're rocking it after they've. I mean, look, it does show you're a true fan. Yeah, you're a true fan. That's fair. I last week for the last week or two, because I grew up a Penguins fan. I'm a very, very big Pittsburgh Penguins fan. But I live in Charlotte now. I live in the Carolinas, and the Penguins have not been that great over the last couple of years. And they traded Jake Gensel. No one can, literally 2% of the.
I don't know what a Gensel is.
I'm
sorry.
Yeah, no one knows. No one's ever heard of a Gensel before. They traded Jake Gensel to the Hurricanes. The Hurricanes are the Carolina team. Was rooting for the Canes a little bit. Had been wearing a Hartford Whalers hat that I have, as support. It's always nice when you have a team that relocated, because then you can wear the old stuff and not necessarily you're telling people maybe I'm hardcore because I'm so hardcore that I'm wearing the old team's logo and such, or I don't love that team as much as you do because I'm not wearing their colors and I'm not wearing their logo, but I'll wear the old one. I always love the retro stuff. I wear as much retro stuff as I possibly can.
I mean, 90s is back. You see it now with the kids. They're starting to wear baggy jeans again. All the stuff that was cool when we were young is cycling back right now, for sure.
Yeah, well, the thing that really annoyed me, I'm not going to lie, is my daughter plays T-ball. I'm a T-ball coach, and we got assigned the Giants for the second straight year, which the Giants as a team is just kind of boring, orange and black. The logo's not really that interesting. And this year, in this season, we faced they had the Expos.
No.
How amazing.
You were wrecked.
How sick would it have been?
Before you even stepped on the field, you were wrecked.
Oh yeah, we got destroyed. I mean, obviously they're not keeping score in T-ball, but we got destroyed by the Expos. Make no mistake. I mean, they annihilated us simply because they were the Expos. But I also grew up a Moises Alou fan. I know it's very random. That's another very random reference to an athlete, but Moises Alou, he peed on his hands, for those of you who don't know Moises Alou, but he played for the Expos for a while. Would have been great to, I like to buy a shirt or a hat or something of that team, and we already had Giants stuff because we were the Giants the previous season, and I was excited. If I had the Expos, I'd be rocking an Expos hat right now on the show instead of this Penguins hat that I'm wearing. You know what is coming back / is here?
Proseg.
Yeah, that was a really, really bad segue. Let's talk about best ball a little bit. Have you been doing any best ball drafts?
You know what? The schedule coming out last week got me looking at week 16, week 17 matchups, and I'm starting to itch a little bit. I want to let the dust settle a little bit. I want to do more shows because I want to mine your brain for more information before I start firing up some drafts. And I obviously can't wait to hear what Pat says and the rest of your guests. So I'm very close to firing a bunch of drafts. Yeah.
I mean, look, you're picking my brain, and I'm going to be picking other people's brains. You're indirectly picking those people's brains as well, because look, you guys are going to hear an interview with Pat Kerrane here in a second, and it was awesome to sit back and talk to him, winner of Best Ball Mania 3. and just see how he's attacking things right now. There was some overlap with how I'm doing things, which made me feel good, that I'm at least approaching this in a logical way in some of the drafts that I'm doing right now. But he had some really interesting insights that I just didn't necessarily, totally think about as I'm doing all of these drafts that I'm doing right now on my adventure of becoming a best ball bro.
And you say all of your drafts. One of my main questions coming into this week was going to be your preference between fast drafts and slow drafts. And in your Discord, the late round Discord, which you can become a member of by becoming a member, I can say I can shill you because I am a paid member and I love the Discord. Patreon, head over, Late Round Fantasy. You told us you are in how many, at that time at least, how many slow drafts, JJ?
I think at the time I counted one morning because it was just it was Saturday morning, hanging out with the family, and I got I looked and I was like, oh, there's a notification on my Underdog app, and I opened it and I was like, I wonder how many I'm in right now. At that point, I was in 66 slow drafts while it was going on. So to give you an idea, I think I've only haven't finished yet 8 Best Ball Manias. So I'm not nearly I didn't know how many I was going to enter in May. I wanted it to be probably a lower number. I think, mid to late July, I'll start to really, really pick things up. And then June, I'll hopefully draft 30-ish maybe in June, 30 to 40-ish. Sounds about right. But yeah, I mean, I am in the middle of 8 of them right now, or have finished a handful, and I'm doing some slows. But most of it was maxing out the Chihuahua, which was that $4 entry, 25 max contest. So I maxed that out, and then I got as many puppies in as I could. I think probably around 50 puppies. I mean, that thing closed up quick, man. I mean, it filled fast. So I wasn't able to, I ideally would have max entered it, but it just filled so quickly that I wasn't able to.
I need to be invited to the room where they come up with all these dog names.
Yeah, for real,
for these
right?
tournaments.
For real. I mean, you just take any breed, and then depending on the size, that's what the entry fee is.
I mean, Mastiff for the high roller, chef's kiss.
Yeah,
well done.
It's very creative.
So you're doing all these drafts. We need a weekly update. What kind of stacks did the schedule make you go crazy for week 17 matchups? What's the landscape been like for JJ for the last week?
It did. I'd say that it did. I'm trying my best, and I talked to Corinne about this a little bit, which you guys will hear. I'm doing my best to get some week 17 game stacks. I think that ADP will formulate and sort of mold towards those game stacks a little bit more as the summer goes on, where naturally people are reaching or not reaching for certain players in order to sort of get those stacks. But yeah, I'm definitely going after those stacks. And I think that what we talked about last week with the tilting of not getting Kirk Cousins on that one team where I had Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Something that Corinne talked about that I'm going to be focusing on a lot is sort of, understanding that, okay, I might not have gotten that quarterback for that stack, but I still have these pieces that I can game stack around. So, obviously in that instance, I'm waiting for Kirk Cousins, Jaden Daniels, who they get week 17, who Atlanta gets week 17, already sort of off the board, right? So I couldn't really benefit from that. But even having, a Washington, Atlanta game stack to some degree, I still have London and Pitts. I think I still had like a McLaurin or a Dotson or something like that. Still having that is still going to be helpful from a correlation standpoint for my teams.
Yeah, no, that's a great point where you might be in a draft and you had this strategy in mind, and all of a sudden, I mean, we see this even in any draft we do, redraft, where you have a plan and sometimes your plan gets dashed and you have to pivot, and that's a great example of what you can do. Maybe you can't fill out the team stack that you're looking for, but you could try to pivot to a week 16 or a week 17 stack. I'm presuming one of the more popular ones will be that Lions and Niners. It's got the highest projected total right now, 49.5. Your boy Kyler and the Arizona Cardinals next, traveling to Los Angeles out here at SoFi to take on the Rams. That has a total of 48.5. And then you've got a bunch in the middle there. The one that I brought up in the Discord, and I got my eye on that Green Bay Minnesota stack, game stack in that game. Total 45.5. It's going to be playing indoors There's some ambiguity right now when it comes to the whole Vikings offense, because is it Darnold? Is it McCarthy? When do they go to McCarthy? But at that time of the season, I'm going to trust that KOC has gotten things going. And whoever's at quarterback has so many good weapons that it'll be a good environment for scoring there. So that's one I'm going to keep my eyes on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've gotten a lot of Green Bay. That's one of the stacks that I've attacked over the last week or so. Part of it is, they don't have a bad final 3-game schedule for the playoffs. But also it's just an easy team to stack. Like, you can realistically, if you don't get Jayden Reed, which I don't think Jayden Reed is isn't like a screaming value or anything. I just think that where Reed goes in drafts, just kind of a dead area. Like, it's an area where there's not that much difference between what you're going to get there early in the round, and if all the tight ends are gone, versus sort of like what you'll get in late 6th and stuff. So I think that he's properly priced. He's not really that glaring of a value, but even if you miss Jayden Reed, you can then, if you have a pretty uncorrelated team through like the first 7 rounds, you can get Christian Watson, Jordan Love very quickly those following 2 rounds. And then even if you don't get Christian Watson, you can go with a naked Love at first. That sounded sexual in a way. You can go with Jordan Love alone, and then go after a Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Luke Musgrave, and you get 3 pretty legit pieces. And then the other piece of that, Marshawn Lloyd, right, where Josh Jacobs is going in, we talked about Jacobs a little bit before, but Josh Jacobs going at that 3-4 turn. And what if something happens to Jacobs? What if Marshawn Lloyd, who I think Marshawn Lloyd's going to play a more significant role than some are projecting. Like, I've seen a lot of takes of Jacobs just being a bell cow in that offense. I think that he has a chance for sure. It's in his range of outcomes, but I think Lloyd can be a piece of that offense, especially when you're looking at the tail end of the season, where he'll get a little bit more reps. They're going to feel a little bit better about them. And Green Bay is a team that could be looking towards the playoffs, and they might not want to just be running Josh Jacobs into the ground either towards the end of the year. So I think that there are so many pieces with Green Bay that you can get late, that even if you don't get Christian Watson and Jayden Reed, you can hypothetically annoy the teams who did get Jayden Reed and Christian Watson and just get Jordan Love.
You made this point last week, and a player you brought up, Dontavian Wicks, I've seen his name come up a little bit. I saw Ian Hartitz tweeting about him as well. But because I'm only a member of the late round multiverse, I'm going to give you all the credit, and I was here on the show. The 3rd biggest mover in ADP from last week is Dontavian Wicks. So, JJ, wow. You're setting waves out there. You're speaking into the ether, and the ether is responding.
Or I'm just doing way too many slow drafts and I'm taking him, 15 picks ahead of ADP, and that's the reason why his ADP is rising. Yeah, look, Wicks is someone that I think is one of the best values right now, if not the best value. I've seen other analysts talking about him too, so I think it's just this combination of a lot of people are talking about Wicks being a value. I think Reed, like I said, should be closer in ADP to some of these other guys. It's just that there's just this dead area in the middle rounds where you can kind of understand why he's being drafted where he's being drafted. And speaking of that dead area, I've kind of gravitated towards Tennessee, Rich. Tennessee's a team that I didn't expect to really be on, but when you're drafting these, if you get a tight end early, let's say you get a tight end in round 4 or 5, right? You get like a Trey McBride or something like that. You feel a little bit behind immediately, especially I have teams where I'm getting Lamar than Mark Andrews, and I'm getting that Ravens stack. And in those cases, you really need to pound wide receiver, or else you're going to be screwed at wide receiver, as the draft goes on. And so in those cases, you're looking in round 6 and into round 7, and you see the Tennessee wide receivers. Hopkins goes even later than that, but I think the gap between Ridley and Hopkins should be a little bit smaller than it is. And you're like, okay, I don't mind this, especially if you get Christian Kirk in round 5 and you can stack that Tennessee-Jacksonville game pretty easily. And the reason I like Tennessee, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Number one, they're not that expensive. Number 2, I don't mind their schedule, and I don't mind that game against Jacksonville at all. I mean, that's just a game that I don't think anyone would be shocked if it shot out, in week 17. And then also you get a new head coach, a new offensive-minded head coach that's going to throw the ball more, almost definitely going to throw the ball more. Will Levis is a down-the-field thrower. We saw that last year. He's a DGAF type quarterback. I mean, he is someone who will be very, very aggressive. And now you put weapons around him. They're geriatric weapons with Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and now Tyler Boyd. But you put these weapons around him and you get these veteran wide receivers. I don't think it's like that crazy to think that Levis would be someone that ends up really outplaying and outperforming his ADP this year. I think that someone who's going to be a true league winner at quarterback that late more than likely is going to need rushing upside and more mobility than what Levis is probably going to bring. But I think Levis could be a low-end QB1 this year if things sort of break his way and touchdown rate looks good. And then on top of that, you can get their running back pieces fairly late. I wrote about this in my newsletter, and I've seen a lot of people like be really in on Tony Pollard this year. I still think that Tajay Spears is the much, much better value compared to Tony Pollard right now in drafts. And, he goes a couple rounds later, but the main reason why just goes back to a lot of the research that I've done with season-long formats, which I think is applicable here, where and I did a podcast literally earlier, that dropped yesterday on, the prospect scores and what these prospect scores mean for running backs in redraft. And one of the big glaring things that not only my previous research showed, but what this research showed is that running backs who are in their first or second year in the league are generally massive values regardless of what that prospect score looks like. With rookie running backs, you're generally only going to see higher prospect scores to begin with because the top 48 is what I looked at the running back position, because no one's drafting like day 3 running backs as like RB3s or RB4s in redraft. But when you're looking at year 2 players, they're great bets across the board. And you also want to look at guys who are pass catchers. Tajay Spears had a 14 to 15% target share last year. I mean, he was used in that role as a pass catcher. I know there's a new coaching staff, but we at least saw that from him. And then the other piece to this, number one, it's an ambiguous backfield, which we always should be targeting. But the other piece to this,
a 3-round discount on. So
yeah, right. The other piece of this, though, is that a lot of my research has shown that running backs in the middle rounds, so let's just call them RB3s, RB4s, maybe even to the RB2 range, those players who are past their 5th year in the NFL have pretty bad hit rates. And Tony Pollard is that player. Now, do I think Pollard would be the guy of the two who would hypothetically be the workhorse in that backfield? Sure. But I think Spears in a stack, right? In a game environment where they're throwing the ball a lot, where they might be trailing a little bit, or even if they're in the lead, what have you. I think Spears is just a more attractive option in a stacking environment than Pollard would be, because I think Pollard, is more of Pollard to me is the less dynamic of the two. He's the less. I think he'll be less effective of the two. And so I'm going to go with the player who has a pretty decent year 2 score in my model. You get the discount, like I said, the pass catching chops are there. Spears was decent last year. And it's weird to me that at the beginning of the offseason in dynasty circles, everyone loved Tajay Spears. Like Tajay Spears was like an RB1 in dynasty rankings, like low end RB1, high end RB2 before free agency started. And then Tony Pollard was the thing that derailed it. I thought everyone hated Tony Pollard. What happened to that?
Well, especially after last year, where he was drafted so high. And it's crazy to think that 1,300 yards is a disappointment. But with so much capital being invested in him and his lack of touchdown production, obviously, he was a massive disappointment last year.
Yeah, so Tennessee's a team that I've been going after, and then I like Jacksonville too. Jacksonville has kind of got that Green Bay to them. It's like a discounted Green Bay in a way, where a lot of their players are, I shouldn't say discounted. I'm thinking more from like a Trevor Lawrence perspective, being cheaper than Jordan Love. But you can get in that 5 to 7 round range. You can very easily get, you get a Christian Kirk, and then you can get Brian Thomas, you can get Evan Ingram, you can get Gabe Davis late. Maybe you spent a 4th in Travis Etienne, fell to a good spot ADP wise, and then you get Trevor Lawrence there too, and you can easily run it back then with some of these Titans players like a Hopkins or one of those running backs. So I don't mind Jacksonville either. And then the last team that I'll shout out as a team that I'm stacking right now is Carolina. And everyone probably either wrecked their car or are profusely vomiting right now. So I like Carolina. Again, they're cheap players that if you miss out on a stack, it's very easy. Obviously Deontay Johnson goes where he goes. So if you didn't get Deontay, that's still fine, because you can get Xavier Legette. Adam Thielen goes late. I'm not like super into getting Thielen, but you can get Legette. And then obviously Bryce Young going late. You could even throw a dart on Jatavian Sanders if you want to. Their rookie tight end, who's not that bad of a prospect. And this is really a bet on, number one, I think the matchup against Tampa Bay is kind of interesting, week 17. So you can stack that. But number two, you're betting on Dave Canales, their new head coach, who we saw him do work with Geno Smith in Seattle. We saw him do work with Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay last year. And now, Bryce Young gets more weapons. He gets a hopeful quarterback whisperer in Canales. And then on top of that with Carolina, I got to shout it out. The top player that I've been drafting this week is Jonathan Brooks, period. He is, after the research that I did on the running back stuff and that episode that dropped, it is very clear that Brooks, number one, is like, Brooks is one of those players who could easily rise in ADP from now until through July, right? Like late July, if he looks seemingly healthy, he's going to be a top 20 running back pretty easily, probably. Like I think he should be able to jump in Aaron Jones, right? Like why wouldn't he be able to get into that range? And so if he's healthy, we'll see that, number one. But number two, when you get a prospect like him and with Brooks, he had a score of about 94 in the ZAP model, which is close to that number of 95 that I was looking at.
Close to the elite 95 score.
Yeah. And look, I don't want to have these arbitrary cutoffs or anything like that, but regardless, players in that 90 to 95 range, when they're RB2s as rookies, they hit at an obscene rate. And not only that, but someone like Brooks, once again, could really do a lot better towards the second half of the season, towards the tail end of the season, during the part of the season that we need these guys to blow up than the earlier parts of the season where they kind of ease him in. So to me, Jonathan Brooks is a screaming value right now. I've been trying to adjust my rankings on the Patreon and my best ball rankings to reflect that. It's, I have like a formula that I'm using to take my redraft rankings and sort of convert them into best ball rankings. But he's someone who's definitely going to rise week over week, just more thought put into it, and a little bit more research being done with those running backs.
He's got a super vet behind him as well. Miles Sanders, super dusty, going in the 18th round right now. And what's interesting to me about all these stacks, I mean, Tennessee, you could literally stack quarterback, tight end, receiver with your last 3 picks in the draft and just kind of like sneak out with one extra stack.
Yeah, Chikakonkwo is another one that I didn't even bring up, where it's just a very like if we see some injuries to one of these wide receivers, he could end up being the number 2 pass catching option. I still think that Tyler Boyd should be projected to probably see more of a target share than Okonkwo this year, but I think could be close. And then on top of that, if you get an injury to a DeAndre Hopkins or a Calvin Ridley, then late in the season, you can have Okonkwo as the number 2 target getter in that Titans offense. All hypothetical, of course. But yeah, I mean, like in an environment where, let's say you go with a Jacksonville stack and you need a third tight end or something because you went with a late round tight end approach, or I've even paired Okonkwo on a Kelsey team and just had those two and just rode with those 2 tight ends within that game stack environment. I think that makes sense.
I see a +1.5 next to Jonathan Brooks right now. He's already starting to trend up. I'm assuming, JJ, just because of this episode and just because of what you said, we're gonna see like a +10 next week. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see about that one. Yeah. So Jonathan Brooks, Tajay Spears, I mentioned I'm drafting a lot. The last guy I want to shout out. This is tough because I've been going back and forth with him sort of all off season, Rich, where at the beginning of the year I called him a dynasty sell, and I think that the process was okay in saying that because his year 2 score is not very strong. I think from a redraft standpoint, the investment is just different, where if you miss on him, it's not that big of a deal. It's Chase Brown.
Interesting. So this is the other back that you brought up on your podcast episode today about the second year in the RB3 range, RB4 range. Yeah.
And look, like it's not unlike what we're seeing with Tennessee, where you have this more veteran established running back as the RB1 from an ADP perspective and from honestly probably a projection standpoint. I think Zach Moss is probably still going to see at least a 60-40 split in his favor. But to me, Chase Brown, at the very least, like I do think he was a little bit overrated as a rookie, as a player. Like his ground game work was not nearly as efficient as people think. It's just that he, from like a success rate perspective, it's just that he can create big plays, and he did that pretty consistently, and he's a good pass catcher too. And so, now you're looking at a Cincinnati team where you're probably gonna have a rookie in Jermaine Burton playing a little slot for them in year 1. Maybe there's a decent target share that could go towards these runs. I mean, Joe Mixon's gone. I think, look, Joe Mixon is Joe Mixon, not the most efficient back in the world, not a sexy back by any means from a fantasy perspective, or someone that you're like really, excited to draft or get exposure to. But Mixon can gobble up looks in his backfield, and he's gone, right? He's no longer there. So I think Chase Brown can at least, I don't think Zach Moss is just going to take Joe Mixon's role, is what I'm saying. And so if that's the case, Brown could step in, create some big plays, and then you get that contingent upside of what if, Rich, in week 15, 16, and 17, Zach Moss breaks his pinky finger and he can't play.
You're so kind.
During those 3 weeks.
You gave him the least consequential injury that would give you the most upside.
Yeah, look, exactly. I don't want Zach Moss I don't want anyone to get dramatically hurt. I'm just saying, football's a violent game. Sometimes your pinky gets broken. And so if Zach Moss is out, if he's sidelined, Chase Brown steps in a small sample, in a 1 week, 2 week sample, Chase Brown can be a bell cow. Like, we could see that happen. And so, I think that where he's being priced right now, he's an easy get for me at this point.
Yeah, the Chase Brown roller coaster for dynasty owners in the offseason was definitely one. Unfortunately, I don't own any shares of him across my dynasty portfolio, but people were super excited when Joe Mixon was bounced, and then super disappointed when Zach Moss was gone. Which, to your point, I mean, it's not like Zach Moss is the next coming. It's not like Gale Sayers is now running for the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, we just chill a little bit.
It's weird, right? And it's really similar, very, very similar to what's going on in Tennessee, where, again, like Zach Moss had a good start to his season. He was not nearly as good towards the tail end, but he had a really, really good start when Jonathan Taylor was out. I think people have a little bit of an anchoring bias going on there where they're like, oh yeah, Zach Moss is really good. Look, I think that Moss is fine. Like, I've been drafting Moss too. I think that attacking ambiguous backfields is the right thing to do. I'm just saying that Chase Brown is probably going to be the pass catcher, just like Tajay Spears, probably more of the pass catcher. And they're both very dynamic backs, good, that can create big plays and create splash plays. So I'm going to lean that way a little bit more when you get the discount in that ambiguous backfield. I think it's a really, really similar situation kind of overall. I think that we should maybe listen to Pat Kerrane instead of us. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, let's see what a millionaire has to say about playing best ball.
Pat Kerrane is the winner of Best Ball Mania 3. So he is a millionaire thanks to winning Best Ball Mania 3. He's the owner of LegendaryUpside.com. He co-hosts the Ship Chasing podcast, a really great show with Pete Overzet and Ben Gretsch. I really enjoyed my interview with him. I mean, he's just a wonderful human being, so it's really easy to chat with Pat and kind of go back and forth with these ideas and just kind of pick his brain. But we talked about roster construction, Week 17 correlation, which we alluded to, team stacking, and how he's approaching both quarterback and tight end. It was a really, really great interview. I think you guys will enjoy it. So without further ado, Mr. Pat Kerrane. This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. There's no better place to play best ball than at Underdog. There are leagues starting all the time, and you can choose whether you want to do a slow draft or a fast one when entering one of those leagues. And you don't just have to play Best Ball Mania to play best ball at Underdog. There's a wide variety of contests to choose from. You can even check out Underdog's other games as well, like Pick'em. Right now, you can get in on the action with a deposit offer and free copy of the late round draft guide just by signing up and depositing. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app. When you sign up, use promo code LATEROUND and make a deposit for a deposit offer and a free copy of the late round draft guide. That guide will then be emailed to you when it launches on July 1st. Again, that's promo code Late Round. Now back to the show. Mr. Kerrane, I got a question for you. I know the answer is probably both to this question, but what do you think is more important in best ball? Simply choosing the right players, which is sort of a mantra that some fantasy analysts go to, or having proper roster construction?
I mean, if you were going to let me have all the league winners or a portfolio of perfectly constructed rosters, I'd take the league winners. I think it's more important to have those guys. But the thing is, where do we actually have control? And we have some control on picking the right players. I spend a lot of time on player analysis and stuff. But I think as a best ball player, especially if you're newer to best ball and you're trying to kind of level up, focusing on roster construction is really the low hanging fruit, because that's where you actually have a lot of control and you can make like huge improvements. And then the other thing I would say with roster construction is when you think about the type of tournament that you're playing, like if you're an Underdog's Best Ball Mania, that's not a tournament that rewards the big prize to whoever scored the most points week 1 through 17. It's not that kind of tournament. In that kind of tournament, like you probably need all the best players in that season because it's just who scored the most points. This is a tournament that has 4 different, like basically qualifying. It has 3 qualifying entries and a final week in week 17. It leads to the situation where like maybe the very best group of players doesn't even take it down. It's really a team that was structured to peak at the end of the season and win a single week in week 17.
Would you say then that your roster construction is sort of dictating your exposure to players in a way and going that direction? Or are you out there seeking these individual players, obviously to some degree, and then sort of letting roster construction fall into place after that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, to me, the whole question is what can I get later and what can I not get later? Mm-hmm. And this is like this, my site's called Legendary Upside because I think in the early rounds, you want to be looking for running backs who have legitimately legendary upside, who can shift the season to be about them. And you can't get that later usually. Like last year, I thought Breece Hall gave us an opportunity to get that. But that was because of very specific circumstances where he's coming off this ACL tear. Most of the time, you have to pay a first or second round pick to get that kind of upside at running back. And I think it's worth it to pay for it, but you want to be shooting for that. You want to be examining where in the landscape you think there's significantly mispriced players and then attack those spots, but understand that essentially you have a budget. Your draft picks, you could kind of equate them to auction dollars, or you've got basically a budget of picks that you're going to be spending. And you don't want to be, coming out of the draft way overspent at like running back compared to wide receiver. I would say the fundamental thing is don't come out of a draft really light at wide receiver, especially on Underdog right now. That's pretty easy to do. And the historical data on basically every Best Ball Mania that they've had shows that the wide receiver, teams with sufficient firepower at wide receiver through the early rounds, through like the first 7 rounds, Hayden Winks has done a lot of research on this, those are the consistently high scoring teams. So above all, I would say make sure you have sufficient wide receiver firepower through the first 7 to 10 rounds.
Let's talk about roster construction more a little bit. So what's your standard build look like? What has your standard build look like? You can even talk about your Best Ball Mania 3 winning team and what that looked like on paper in that roster construction. It was Best Ball Mania 3, yeah?
Best Ball Mania 3, yeah.
Yeah. Your big W. Yeah. And so, like, what did that look like? And do you see that changing and your approach changing in 2024? We obviously don't want to overstate, small sample sizes or like what happened last year and just take that data and, apply it to the 2024 season. But what's your roster construction generally look like? And is that changing here in 2024?
Yeah, so I won with a running back start, but my general approach, which I actually think is consistent with that team, is to be wide receiver heavy. The thing with that team is I didn't take my 3rd running back until round 10, hit on Ramondre Stevenson there, and then I took 2 more running backs in the entire draft in round 16 and 17, hit on Raheem Mostert in the 16th. So I had 4 good running backs: Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, Ramondre Stevenson, Raheem Mostert. I had 4 good running backs. The other one was Sony Michel. So that was a waste. So I had 4 good running backs on the team all season, which was more than enough. And I had enough wide receiver firepower to be able to take down week 17, where I had Tom Brady go off with Chris Godwin stack, DJ Moore bring back was a really important element of that. Austin Eckler carried that team that week and for much of the season. And like I was saying, I mean, I think if you hit on a early round running back, it really can be game changing. The trick is if you're going to go running back, you are way behind at wide receiver now. Right. That's okay. It doesn't mean you can't go running back. It just means you have to play it like you're way behind from that point forward. If you get, an awesome value on Josh Jacobs in the 5th, like, I'm sorry, man, like that's not for you. That's someone else is getting that. You know?
It's rough. That's a tough thing to do. So you're saying, you're advocating, in those situations, because a lot of people are going to be stuck in those situations while they're drafting, right? Where they, like earlier today, I'm looking at one of my drafts. I didn't get any Houston Texans wide receiver early on in my draft, right? And a lot of times you'll see this happen where, the teams that get, let's say they get a Nico and a Stephon Diggs or something like that in 2-3, and then later in the draft, they decide to skip on CJ Stroud in the 5th, and then Stroud, because no other team really cares about stacking him, Stroud just falls, and he has this fall. Stroud got to the early 7th in this draft that I was in, but I had already gotten Lamar and Mark Andrews, and I had to skip on it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's so painful, but you're advocating, you're saying that's probably the right thing to do in that instance.
That's the right thing to do in that instance. Your team, if it wins all the money, is going to show up in week 17 against a bunch of other teams. If you show up with a Lamar Andrews stack and your 7th round pick is CJ Stroud, you're going to be like, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah, right.
Give me any other 7th round pick than CJ Stroud right now.
Right.
Your path to the money is very clearly Lamar goes nuts and his touchdowns go through Andrews, and then you're very live. But you want a 7th round pick who's going to hit your lineup, and Stroud cannot if Lamar is hitting your lineup. So you can talk yourself into, oh, this team's more likely to advance, but you're really you just want that value. You just want that sweet CJ Stroud value. But you box yourself out of it, and you just have to play it like that.
So how is your approach, if at all, then changing in 2024? It seems like, anecdotally, I haven't looked at year over year ADP like in super, super strong detail, but it seems like anecdotally that we've pushed wide receivers up even further than what we've seen even in 2023, 2022. It seems like every year wide receivers are just getting drafted earlier and earlier in these underdog drafts. Are you changing your approach at all? Are you zigging while others are zagging? Like, do you find that, the Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor values where you can get them in the mid to sometimes even late second, like, is that attracted to you? How are things sort of changing for you this year?
I do think there's some running back values early on. I'm taking some Taylor. I'm not taking much Barkley. I actually like Achane a lot going, because now that he's fallen into the early 3rd. But yeah, things have changed significantly since last year, where last year wide receivers were kind of at an all-time high. I felt like we needed to basically swim with the current there and get our wide receivers. It's very difficult to swim again. To be honest, I think these extreme wide receiver prices are efficient because it's so hard not to go with the current on this.
Exactly.
Whereas before, with zero, you could go zero running back, and sometimes you'd have dead teams because you just wouldn't get like any running backs.
Right.
And that was a bummer. But a lot of times you'd end up with really strong wide receivers. And then when you hit on the running backs, you have these super teams, and you could swim against this current that was like basically saying running backs are scarce. We have to take them all early. There was a counter strategy that was really powerful. It is very difficult to find a counter strategy to this because if you don't have enough wide receivers early, it's really difficult to get them later. And if I pass on a Saquon, I can get, like, I got Najee Harris at like 101 the other day. I mean, like Najee, like now you're giving me like Drake London, Najee Harris, or like Saquon Barkley and Curtis Samuel or something.
Right.
Or Mike Williams. It's like, the 2v2s just they're just not appealing when you take the early running back side a lot of the time. Now, if you're strategic, if you grab a running back and then you get enough wide receivers around that running back to where you're not even making the 2v2, you're instead of drafting like a wide receiver you're not super psyched about in round 10 or 11, you're getting a quarterback there, or you're getting another running back there. That's where I think you can kind of take advantage of these running back prices. And I think there are some opportunities to be had, but it's about kind of like, you want to go in, don't get overly tempted by all the beautiful running back values. Pick out your favorite, grab that one, and then build a team around it.
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of people have come to me about since starting this series and such, and them just being more interested in best ball and whatnot, and how it's how it differs from redraft. And their season-long leagues, their managed leagues, right? And to me, I think one of the big differences, the key differences that you're going to see when it comes to the wide receiver position is, number one, like you said, you can't fall behind, but you also are sort of forced, as you're saying, to get these wide receivers because you will undoubtedly fall behind at some point. And the difference between best ball and season long is that people eventually stop drafting wide receivers in your season long league, right? Like they might only roster 5 or 6 wide receivers at the end of the day, whereas you're getting, teams that have 8 or 9 wide receivers at times, throughout your best ball draft. And that means that there's just fewer of them that are going to be readily available. And so it just makes it more difficult. And I've done research in season long also, where wide receivers are a little bit more difficult to grab off the waiver wire. I say a little bit more, but it's not as dramatic as some people will make it seem. But they're a little bit more difficult to grab off the waiver wire than running backs are. And if all of those quote waiver wire players, or a lot of them, are part of the drafting pool, then that means that a lot of those guys are drafted, right? And so you're basically capturing a lot of that sample essentially within your actual draft. So it's just harder in general to get these wide receivers. Let's move on to another topic that's maybe controversial, a little bit controversial, maybe people agree. I don't know. You can tell me. But that's correlation, game stacks and correlation within those game stacks. So as we know, the structure of these tournaments are, as you said, there's this 4-week playoff, and you get to the last week, and you want to have a team that's heavily correlated, because if that game hypothetically blows up, if you have a Jacksonville, Tennessee stack, and that game goes nuts and nuclear in week 17, then that's good for your squad to get a good payout. My question to you is, number one, how important is game stacking week 17? How much should you force it? Which I know is one of those questions that I hate getting as an analyst, is how much, because it's just really hard to give a percentage or a direct answer to something like that. But just generally speaking, how frequently are you sort of forcing the game stack? And then my follow-up to that is, do you think because of the flatter payout structure this year, especially with Best Ball Mania, that people should or might want to focus a little bit more on week 16 just to get in the dance and just to get there week 17 and be able to compete, because they know that, okay, even if I get 20th, that's still a decent payout?
Yeah, the week 16 discussion has been interesting, because some of the math shows that if you could basically pull a lever that was do better, you would want to pull that lever in week 16 because it occurs first. And so, getting into week 17. So if you just had a do better lever, I think you would pull it week 16. The problem is we don't really have that lever. We have a lever in game stacking that's kind of add a little risk, but score maybe a gajillion points. And I think that lever is better pulled in week 17 when you have to beat 500 plus people instead of 15. You're kind of if you're trying to find this unicorn game that goes nuts and scores all the points, give that to me in the 500 plus field. I think that seems pretty clear to me, but I do understand that we want to be doing stuff that improves our chances of week 16, and week 16 is more important than it was last year. To me, can be things like same team stacking, which helps you in week 16, week 15, which is also a single week tournament, week 17. Same team stacking also helps your advance rate. So that I think with week 16, I'm mostly trying to either get it for free, where I'm getting a player who plays a team in week 16 and week 17. I like that. Or I'm trying to focus on, adding in same team elements, or just kind of the overall archetype of late season production. Rookies, guys who might be coming on down the stretch, contingent value running backs, that type of thing. But yeah, this is a tournament where we do really need to be focusing on the fact that it is a single week tournament, and whoever scores the most points in week 17 is going to win all the money. So I think game stacking is pretty important, and I don't think you want to force it. There's a wrong way to do this, right? We don't want to add a frat. I'm very kind of if I see a running back who's got a lot of projected touches, but I don't think he's very good, that's usually a guy I'm going to avoid, because I'm that's a very fragile bet to be making for a guy who I need to be scoring a lot of points in week 17. That's literally in December. It's a long time away. I need this to go a long time. I need to make a prediction that's going to survive for a long time. I see people now, they're making a prediction that the 49ers and the Lions are going to score a ton of points in December. And they're taking Sam Laporta to pair with CMC, 8 picks ahead of where he used to be going. That to me is not the way to do this, because we don't know anything. We don't know anything about what these games. There's going to be defenses that are riddled with injuries that we're attacking. They're the clear spots to play in DFS. There's going to be breakout offenses that are super underpriced in retrospect. What you're trying to do with the week 17 and the stacking in general is to find one of those spots where you're collecting a bunch of wins with one bet. So you bet on one offense, you bet on one game, and lo and behold, it's the nuts. It's what you need.
Yeah.
There's no way we can know that now. And that's the point. So the cheaper that you can make these bets, I'm betting a lot on the Patriots, on the Broncos, some of these like late offenses where I can scoop up a bunch of pieces. The other thing is if you're kind of building it in, you're not committing the whole draft. So for example, let's say you take Ladd McConkey. If you don't get Justin Herbert, it's not a big deal. What I will try to do, I will try to get Justin Herbert. I will kind of keep building Chargers. But if I don't get Justin Herbert, I have also set myself up for a week 17 game stack with the Patriots. Right. And I can add those Patriots pieces later, and I can add Drake May as a quarterback 2 or quarterback 3 if I want to do that. So you're kind of like, if you just kind of keep it in the back of your mind, you can use it to add flexibility to your draft so that you're like never boxed out of stuff, or it's much harder to box you out of things. If you overly focus on it, I think you can make mistakes.
Yeah, there seems to be like a lot of situations like what you're referring to, where if you do miss out on that quarterback to complete a stack, you mentioned Justin Herbert. I mean, I think there's, Trevor Lawrence. Let's say you miss out on Jacksonville, you can still get Will Levis late if you're getting one of those Tennessee pieces. Or I think a really easy one is like Green Bay with Minnesota, right? Like if you started your draft out with Justin Jefferson, or, you got a Jordan Addison or something like that, and then you started to pile on top of that and you get Christian Watson, and then someone snipes you and you no longer have, Jordan Love, you can still hypothetically get a Dontavian Wicks, who's a great value right now, and then still get JJ McCarthy late and still have some sort of stack there. There's actually a lot of those situations across when you look at the week 17 landscape. Like Carolina is another one. Carolina is really, really easy to stack. If you get like an Evans or a Godwin or something, or a Rashad White, if you went running back there, and then you can at least bring it back that way. So I like that.
And Legette's sitting there. You can open up that stack that way. So yeah, there's a lot.
There's a lot, and it's nice that there's a lot. And then there's teams like let me ask you this. I like the way that I've approached it so far, and you can tell me how wrong this is because I'm trying to learn here. It's the whole point of the show. If I'm looking at, let's say, New Orleans, for instance, they get Vegas week 17. That game on paper looks like kind of trashy, generally speaking, but at the same time, we know that there's a lot of variance. We know there's a lot of unpredictability. And so for me, if I'm getting a Chris Olave or something in round 2, and then I get a Juwan Johnson, and I start to like just kind of, I get like a Brock Bowers or something, and I'm just like casually stacking that game, so far I've been okay with doing that because I'm sort of letting variance take the wheel. Are there any games that you just are like, no, I don't want to stack this? I'm not saying you got to do it, be overweight on it. I just mean in general, are there games that you would just completely not be into stacking and just fading for that week 17 matchup?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think if you've made a bet on a player, he's going off in week 17. Okay. So that now. So now what else is that likely to create? And it might drive scoring on the other side. Like unless there's like a whole offense that you're fading because you just don't ever take them ever. Yeah. That would be the only way that I'm fading a week 17 game stack. Because if I have the other side of something, I'm going to want to mix players in. To me, it's also a way of naturally diversifying. Where I'm like, I don't take this guy a lot, but he's fallen to me, and he correlates with a piece that I took. So I'm going to break a tie to him, and I'm not just going to do the same thing in every draft, which is such a bias that I have to fight. Where I just want to take my favorite.
I know.
I don't have to do anything.
Tough,
but but it's a nice way of going. Okay, you know what? This is a smart thing to do. I can go ahead and take the guy on the other side of this. So I think you want to be open minded about what games are going to go off, and like. The stack that won it for me, I mean, was Tom Brady in his bad year. It was bad Tom Brady. He retired after.
Yeah, right. Well, he needed to do that for you before he went off and rode off in the sunset.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, exactly. he finally gave back.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, seriously though, like that game was trash. Like, if you wouldn't have wanted to. Now, it ended up being, I think the Panthers offense was so bad and the Buccaneers offense was so bad, but people attacked it in DFS that week. But these bad games can sometimes end up putting up a bunch of points. Like if the Saints, like if the Raiders are a dumpster fire and the Saints, are kind of like searching for answers and they're clearly not going anywhere, it could still go over. The total can still go over.
Right. That's the thing that I think that like it's not like Derek Carr has never, I mean, maybe he's not even starting a quarterback week 17, but
right. Well, that's a little bit of a concern.
Obviously the quarterback situations in both of those instances might be a little bit unstable, but regardless, like it's not like we've never seen Derek Carr put up a big game or like have a decent game or, a 350 plus yard game. Like it's happened before. And so I think that the open-mindedness is important when you're doing at least a good number of drafts. Speaking of quarterbacks, how are you attacking that position this year? I mean, I think like we've seen, over the last handful of years, elite quarterbacks be a lot more stable than they used to be, in like the 2015, 2016 timeframe when you're looking at season long leagues. I mean, from the data that I've seen other people like research and look at, seems like elite quarterbacks are still not bad, like horrible bets in best ball where, again, like when I was doing MFL 10s a decade ago, it was, you shouldn't even think, like sniff the quarterback position until like round 10. It just didn't matter at all. So this year, when you're looking at the landscape, how are you generally attacking it?
Yeah, I think like there's at the other positions, there's some spots where I'm like, man, this is really mispriced. But quarterback, I don't find that a lot. I think like most of the quarterbacks are like pretty well priced. And so I'm trying to get exposure to a lot of different guys. I'm kind of letting my stacks drive it a little bit. The big thing I would say is like getting sniped really, really hurts. It's no fun. It's a lot less painful if you have something else kind of already started to be built in where you can easily move to something else. Like you've got, if you have Ladd McConkey, you also have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram double stack. You get sniped on Lawrence. You take Justin Herbert. That's not really the end of the world. And I think the thing, you talk about the Saints, the Saints stack, maybe you have Derek Carr there, maybe you don't. If you have the Saints and the Raiders stacked up without the quarterbacks, that's pretty cool. That game could go off. You're getting a bunch of pieces that are all hitting your lineup simultaneously, which is hard to do. Like, think you have to get a lineup that not only like hits a couple amazing, like holy crap kind of scores, but then you're around those scores, you're going to need like a bunch of really good scores too. So finding a game that goes nuts, even if you don't have the quarterback, is huge. Like you kind of need it almost. So or at least it's one of the easiest ways to find what we need. So, when you think about like, oh man, this dude grabbed this quarterback unstacked 6 spots ahead of ADP. I'm going to lose my mind.
Some of my drafts 6 rounds ahead of ADP. Pat. Like, this is the way I'm fully experiencing. I was telling you before we started recording, like the tilt of being sniped with a stack. When I was playing best ball like the last handful of years and whatnot, I'd get over it because I wasn't being very public with my best ball drafting and such. Now that I'm creating content around it and I'm going to be talking about exposure and I'm going to be sharing some lineups, all that kind of stuff, it's just beyond tilting when that kind of stuff happens because there's just more on the line for me, in terms of like what these drafts mean. I mean, when you have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and someone drafts Tua in round 6, you just want to punch a hole through the wall.
To a Mostert round 6 double up. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's super frustrating. But like one thing I would say the elite quarterbacks are one way to, if you've just been dealing with some of that pain, getting an elite quarterback and then you can do stuff like that. Like, that particular stack Tua Waddle's a little expensive to pair with an elite quarterback, I think. But, if you have like some of the Jacksonville stuff, you can pair that kind of stack with like a Josh Allen, with a Lamar Jackson. And it's like show me Trevor Lawrence, show me you can outscore Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen when he's having an awesome week 17. Like you're not hitting my lineup. I don't need you. I'm essentially taking you without taking you. Because I'm going to bet on your pass catchers, and then instead of grabbing Lawrence, you're going to grab a running back in that range or whatever, and then you take a quarterback too later on, who basically helps you through Allen's bye week or contributes a score here or there. Maybe you get a spike week in week 15 or something. So Yeah, I think like I guess the elite quarterbacks can be a way of preventing that tilt where you can get sniped a bunch on some of those secondary stacks. You'd really just need one other stack, and you build three. Maybe you build three additional stacks beyond your elite quarterback stack, and you just let the market decide who you end up with at the end of the draft.
I feel like the position that might make or break, and again, please disagree if you think that this is just a completely wrong take. The position that might make or break drafts this year is tight end. And I say that because, previous years we kind of had like kind of more obvious pockets in terms of, you get Kelce in round 1, maybe you get Andrews in round 2, and then you're just waiting a little while. And then, maybe there's like a Goddard that you throw in there for a stack or something like that. But it was just this very clear cut defined way of you're going to get tight end or you're not. Whereas now, you see Laporta, as you mentioned, in the late third, sometimes he'll fall to the fourth. Travis Kelce has been rising a little bit, early fourth, what have you. And then you get into the McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts range. It just seems like you can go in so many different directions. And then all the while, you've had folks like Hayden Winks come out with really great research talking about how going with a late round tight end approach and this is something that I've obviously done a lot of work in from a managed season long league perspective with like living the stream and streaming tight end. But, he comes out with research talking about how getting 3 tight ends late is just as helpful, or if not better, than going after those elite guys. But obviously those elite guys, things are changing from a market perspective, right? Because now instead of Kelce going round 1, he's in round 4. And if you do hit on that ceiling with one of those tight ends, it seems like it'd be hugely advantageous. So my question to you is, how are you attacking tight end this year? And do you agree that this could really be what differentiates one team from the next as you get into week 15, 16, and 17?
Yeah, I think it's very likely that tight end is the key to this season. We're seeing really reduced prices on the elite tight ends. And unlike last year, we have a very weak tight end class coming in. Maybe not very weak because you have Bowers in it, but the late rounds, unlike last year, are not just filled with these really exciting rookie tight ends. We got the McBride breakout last year as well, which was huge. It's tough for me when I look at the late. It's like I'm looking at kind of like Noah Fant's kind of interesting. Like, oh, what if he runs a bunch of routes? But he's still the 4th option on Seattle.
Exactly. Right.
There's just not a lot of guys that jump out. You're mostly touchdown hunting. You're mostly going for stacks. In general, I think elite tight end is a really strong strategy. It's had really good success in these tournaments over the years because, and I wrote an article about this last year, I think what it allows us to do is basically capture a lot of the tight end spike weeks that are available, because we're kind of good at we know who these guys are because they play a different position, right? Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, like they don't play the same position as Tyler Conklin.
Right.
They don't.
Right.
These guys do different things. Like, and it doesn't take like a ton of like, brain power to be able to be like Travis Kelce different than these other tight ends. So we're all, as a market, we're pricing these guys correctly, basically. And we see that in the data where a big share, bigger than at wide receiver and at running back, a big share, and at quarterback too, we're seeing a big share of the available spike weeks at the position they collect at these elite tight ends. And so when you grab one, you're giving yourself a chance to have one of those spike weeks, which can be very impactful. Now, Hayden Winks has showed that the tight ends separate a little bit less than the other positions. The thing that I look at is like, you're talking about like teams that are putting up a bunch of points. And it's what we've seen is that it's extremely helpful if you can get one of these spike weeks to hit your lineup at tight end, because it's a difficult position to have really any points at. So if you get that spike week, you're like way ahead of the field already. And Madison Parkhill just had a really good article on elite tight end, noting that like even last year's results, and last year was a pretty weak year for a weak tight end or for elite tight end. He noted that Sam Laporta's 26.1 half point PPR points was such a driving force that he ended up on the winning Best Ball Mania lineup, even though his score didn't count in week 16 or 17. He was on 4 of the top 5 BBM finishing teams. He scored 11.9 points in week 17, which is not great, but that counted on 3 of those 5 teams to get in the top 5 of the week 17 final, that week 15 spike week was so impactful that you almost like didn't need him to do anything else, and he was still on all the winning teams. That's like where I think now, how do we find that? Last year we had a chance to find that in the late rounds. This year I think it's a little bit more difficult to find that kind of impact week, and you're getting basically paid to look earlier in the draft because you're getting a discount. You're getting a discount on Mark Andrews. You're getting a discount on these elite tight ends relative to where they've typically gone. So I'm hammering elite tight end right now. Obviously, I need these specific players to come through in the specific season and very specific weeks, but I think it's a big edge.
Yeah, I mean, look, the opportunity cost isn't that dramatic. Like, it's just not that. When you get into round 4, round 5, is like I like some of the players. Don't get me wrong, but it's just not nearly as significant as when you're taking Kelsey in round 1, or if you're taking, Andrews in round 2. As pitiful as round 2 seems to be this year, versus previous years, like there's still a massive opportunity cost if you're, taking that on. Whereas if you're getting some of these guys who project to have really, really strong target shares in round 4 to round 6, where these guys go, the cost in doing that isn't that dramatic at the end of the day. I mean, you can get more than likely, some of those wide receivers are going to hit, right? Like maybe Xavier Worthy hits, maybe, Christian Kirk hits, what have you. But at the same time, from a projection standpoint, the delta, from my perspective, between, like a Kirk and Worthy to maybe someone that you can get towards the end of round, into like round 7 or something, is just not that dramatic. Like, it's like not that massive when you think about, oh, I can have Trey McBride, or I'm starting out. I mean, you might as well just wait forever, as opposed, unless you're stacking like a Philly stack or a Cowboy stack or something like that. You might as well just wait a pretty long time, because there's not going to be that big of a difference. I mean, middle round tight ends, historically, I say middle round as in like the tight ends 6 to 12, and this is all season long research based, but those guys have been some of the most replaceable players in the history of fantasy football. And so now we have that. It's a little bit deeper than I'd say. It's up to like tight end 7 or so. But beyond that, it's like, okay, you're just getting guys that you hypothetically, if a late round tight end hits, he's going to give you that kind of production. And we see that kind of player hit pretty regularly year in and year out.
Yeah. We want the spike weeks. So if you're like going for like, hey, I know this guy's going to be out there running routes and I'm going to pay like a 10th round pick for that, that's generally not great. We want the guys who can change a week, who like the winning DFS lineups have, like that type of player, winning DFS lineups have with like a decent salary, like that type of player is who you want, I think.
Let me ask you this. If there's one piece of advice that you could give anyone about best ball, winning best ball tournaments, what would that piece of advice be?
The thing with best ball is I've been kind of putting this thought together this offseason, like that best ball is really about managing floor and ceiling. That's the way this game separates itself from like the other games that, we kind of all came in through, right? Like Dynasty, Redraft. Dynasty to me is about floor. You're trying to prevent the bottom from falling out on your various assets. You're trying to stay liquid in the trade market. Redraft is about ceiling. Just give me the highest upside guys. I know I'm going to whiff on some. Doesn't matter. I got the waiver wire. I'm going to fall back. I just want ceiling. I want as many, like this. That's why I think, the streaming thing works so well. It's like you're like, give me the high upside picks and the high upside rounds, and I'll go replace stuff later. You can't replace stuff in best ball. There's no waiver wire. Everyone is on your roster. Everything's locked. You're going to want these final roster spots to be scoring points for you at the end of the season. We've seen that. We've seen, these a rookie wide receiver, late round rookie wide receiver has been on all 4 of the winning Best Ball Mania rosters. We had KJ Hamler score a meaningful week for Justin Herzig. Amon-Ra St. Brown was on Liam's team. I had Tyquan Thornton score a touchdown as an 18th round pick and hit my lineup. Okay. I mean, the guy doesn't even need to be good, but you gotta get points out of these picks. Jaden Reed last year was really big for Fareed's team. So the ability to pair together really, really high ceiling hits with a roster that also has a lot of floor in the idea that like all the roster spots are scoring points pretty regularly. You're not taking zeros. You didn't sacrifice a bunch of roster spots to find this hit. You have to be able to find the hit and then pair it with a bunch of other productive roster spots. To me, the way to do that is you play for the end of the season. You play for the very end of the season. Who gives you ceiling and floor at the end of the season? Rookies, rookie wide receivers, especially rookie wide receiver. Who's likely a team to be taking a look at in week 17, even if they're bad? A rookie wide receiver. You know, if you can find cheap rookie wide receiver, and Jalen Polk, for example, is a really strong pick right now. People don't want to take the Patriots. He's a second round pick in an extremely ambiguous wide receiver room. He's going to be playing at the end of the season. He just is, you know, and you can get him in like round 14 or 15 or whatever. Like, yes, that is a good pick. Like these are the ways to kind of pair together ceiling and floor. Ceiling is massive. You don't want to get too conservative in the early rounds. You want to be taking the guys who can actually change the game, change weeks. But at the same time, you can't sacrifice roster spots at the same time.
You always love when things align too with like a lot of season long research, because I've been talking about, you know, the rookie wide receiver stuff, even from a managed league perspective. It's one of those things where number one, you should basically be targeting them in every format, like no matter where they're getting drafted. You know, Marvin Harrison is an outlier at this point, just because we haven't seen a guy get drafted that early. But regardless, rookie wide receivers, rookie running backs, you want to go after those guys. Not only do they exceed ADP expectation at a really strong rate, but as you've alluded to, you know, some of the research I've done too, they just perform so much better during the second half of the season, especially when you're looking at like the day 2 into day 3 guys, because day 1 players, day 1 rookies are going to find the field pretty much right away for the most part, right? So like they're going to be producing from start to finish, start of the season to the end, but it's the guys that are, you know, the Amon-Ra St. Browns, where you know, they don't necessarily have this massive opportunity to start, but they play into it, whether due to injury or not, and then they blow up down the stretch. And we've seen that even Jaden Reed last year, you could say, is similar, right? Yeah. And so those are the guys, it makes sense that those would be the guys that you absolutely want, you know, with your lineups. And you alluded to it earlier too, with the contingent upside running backs, where, you know, in those big weeks towards the end of the season, you know, the injuries are piling up in these backfields. Those are the players that you want on your best ball rosters, because they can step in and then be starters for their team.
Yeah, I think that's partly why that's another reason why it's so difficult to really truly swim against these wide receiver prices, is that if you have a team that's loaded up with running backs in like rounds 10, 11, that's where we tend to price these really interesting contingent value guys, or sort of like secondary guys in a committee, or really uncertain backfields. Like if you're right on those guys, you're going to be right more towards the back of the season. What you're probably sacrificing is like week 1 through 4 production. But if you scrape by, you finish second in your pod, then you show up in week 15, all that's wiped away. No one cares how many points you scored in week 3 now. You just need to score a bunch of points in week 15. And you're set up to do that if you have running backs that are, you know, have taken jobs by the end of the season.
Before I let you go, give me 2 or 3 guys that you've been targeting a lot, you know, during drafts, that, you know, aside from stacking, just players that you seem to gravitate towards and think are very good values right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's like a bunch of rookie wide receivers we could talk about. I think that's like an archetype, right? We want to be attacking the elite tight ends. I love Mark Andrews. I'm taking a ton of him. But I've talked down about kind of the running back position here. So let me give you two running backs that I really like. The first is Devon Achane. This is a guy going in the early rounds that I want on my teams. Again, what am I fundamentally trying to do? I'm trying to win a single week tournament in week 17. Who can help me do that? Devon Achane. Last year in the finals, I'm flipping over teams going, really hope Achane's on this one. I would really like to see Achane on this team. He didn't go off in the final, but like we know this guy can go off. He's hyper efficient. I was reading your write-up in the second year model of him talking about a 7.8 yards per carry.
Oh my God.
It's insane. Like
it's insane.
Like,
he's insane.
Listen, I know he's not going to get the full workload, and I know he's not going to be the goal line back and everything, but like, what if he does for a week?
right. Or what if he just has 2 40-yard touchdowns? Like it's not out of the question. That was actually, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I got a question about Achane. I don't know if it was about Achane or if it was just about projections in general on a mailbag episode recently. And I talked about Achane, and his projection does not look amazing because there's regression baked in, like all that kind of stuff. And it's tough to project that kind of player, but inherently he's one of the, you don't want to use it as an excuse, but he's one of the better in best ball kind of players where I think he's going to be, I mean, like he's fine from a season long perspective. I even said on the show, I'm like, I'm never going to tell someone to not draft Devon Achane, right? Like that can't be a thing for me because I know that the ceiling is out of control. But I do think that in best ball, it's just a little bit easier to handle. I also think from like a backfield, from like a team management standpoint, to me, the Jalen Wright pick, yeah, it's another speedster, another, guy who can thrive in this system. But hypothetically, I mean, we would all assume that he could dig in more into a 32-year-old Raheem Mostert who's often injured, as opposed to the second-year guy who's coming off quite literally the most efficient running back season that we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. So yeah, I'm with you. I've been drafting him a little bit more and more. At first I was like, why is he going here? And then I took a step back, try to put on my best ball cap and thinking cap. And I realized that, okay, this is the reason why, and you can get him in the early third now too.
Yeah, no, you can. I've been pushing him a little bit because I was taking a bunch in the second, and now if I'm on the turn, I'll try to get different combos and push him around to get him in the third. But yeah, I mean, he's better in best ball in terms of the spike week. He's also better in tournament best ball in the sense that, again, we're trying to make bets that survive to late December. And one of the ways, I talk about one way is rookies, but another is just talent, right? Like Breece Hall has his quarterback tear his Achilles in the first game last year. He's playing with Zach Wilson on the floundering Jets, and he's one of the guys that you want at the end of last season because he's awesome. That's it. He's awesome. Pick guys who are awesome. It's not like you got your second and third round pick. Pick a guy who's awesome at football. That's a way to have a bet survive to the end of the season. It's a floor and ceiling when you take the talented guys. Devon Achane is an awesome running back. I feel very confident about that. I don't know how things are going to play out for him exactly this season or in any given week, but I think, yeah, he can have those spikes weeks for me. But like, even if things kind of go a little bit off the rails this year for the Dolphins offense, I have confidence that Devon Achane is still going to be someone I'm interested in. Yeah,
for sure. Are there any other running backs that you like? One more. Give me one more running back.
Jaylen Warren has been my guy for a couple years. Last year, he was my second highest drafted player behind Breece Hall. This year, he's probably going to be my highest drafted player. Najee Harris had a pretty decent year last year and is well priced this year. I don't think Najee Harris is a bad pick. I think he's actually a good pick, but I think Jaylen Warren is an even better pick because I think he's the most talented player in that backfield. He's been awesome for a couple years. He's got enough size to where he can be used on early downs, but he's a really good receiver. His rushing efficiency is fantastic. Last year in NFL Next Gen's rush yards over expected, he finished behind only Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane, and James Conner. This dude is consistent, and he's explosive, and he's a good receiver, and he's going to be on a team that runs the ball a ton. He scored a very usable score in Week 17 last year with Najee Harris handling 27 carries. So like there should be plenty of volume in this backfield now that Arthur Smith's there. I think we could see that kind of stuff. Then you also just get the contingent value for free. Like this guy, he's going to be putting up points for you. He goes in the 90s. So like what he gives you in the 90s is like more than enough just in his normal role. If Najee Harris misses a couple games at the end of last season, or if they get sick of it, like they didn't pick up this guy's fifth-year option, if they just decide to hand it off to Warren and let's see what he can do with a full workload at the end of the season, you might need him. You might need Jaylen Warren if he has that backfield to himself because he's really, really good and there will be a lot of volume there.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about, obviously ambiguous backfields is something that I've been talking about for years on the show, but one of the easy ways to sort of spot a value in an ambiguous backfield is to say, oh, this guy's being drafted at his projection right now. This is sort of how I felt about Tony Pollard a couple years ago, whenever he had his big season. He's being drafted at his projection, but then there's this contingent upside. If something were to happen to his backfield teammate, then all of a sudden it's rocket ship emojis. So I really like the Jaylen Warren call. Crane, man, it was great to chat and to ask you questions, pick your brain a little bit about this best ball landscape. Let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, legendaryupside.com is the place to check out my rankings. I've got Underdog and DraftKings rankings there. Going to be launching FFPC rankings. Probably by the time you're listening to this, those will be out. Working on drafters rankings in the next couple weeks. Got a bunch of analysis up there. Got an article about, it's a free article from last year about dealing with getting sniped. So the listeners might
I need to read that. Yeah.
I've got an article, another free article up there talking about it's about a Central American tree that they found in 1965. But it's a metaphor for kind of if you're making big bets on a player, kind of how to build a portfolio of teams around big player stands. Because I want to take big player stands, but I want to do it in a thoughtful way. And so it's an article about that. But yeah, we've got some research-based stuff on best ball, rolling out some dynasty stuff over there as well. If you go to legendaryupside.com/perks, you can see how to get a $50 Underdog credit with a yearly subscription.
Awesome, man. Really appreciate your time. As usual, everyone, you can check out my stuff over on lateround.com. I'm on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, thanks for tuning in.